Our next interview is with Renee Chavez, a Pathways Navigator at La Placita in the South Valley here in Albuquerque. Renee was incarcerated at a very young age, and she spent majority of her youth, 20s, and 30s in the criminal justice system. Her lived experiences have given her the unique ability to truly understand the consequences, both good and bad, of incarceration, which allows her to be a valuable asset and resource to our community when seeking for solutions to our incarceration problems. Renee shares a part of her powerful story, which speaks to the importance of having a sense of belonging. Let's check it out. All right, so Renee, how young were you when you first got involved with the criminal justice system, and what was that introduction like?
Wow. So I was 12 years old when I was my first arrest into the juvenile justice system. And so my life was already chaotic. And I lived in the International District of Albuquerque. So, my mom had started exploring drug use. And so with that came a lot of dysfunction. And I got shuffled out into a fast living. And I'll never forget the first time the sounds. I think, the realization that I was in a holding cell as a youth and not knowing what my parents would think or if they even thought anything about it at all. So, as I sit back and remember that time, I think what stands out to me the most is the first time I ever got strip searched as a youth and had to take showers with other women, and, with no curtains. Being that young, not really knowing too much, but thinking you know it all. So, yeah, I still have a very vivid picture of the concrete, bare feet, no clothes, and a wide open space. It wasn't like it was a tight little cubicle. It was a big shower, I can still see the cement floors and the blue uniform they brought in for me to put on afterwards, actually.
Wow. So you were introduced at a very young age, and then life progresses for you, and you find yourself still entangled with this system. What kept you entangled, and how did that craft you into who you are?
I've had a lot of time to think about the beginning, my youth, and what kept me entangled, as you say. Not shifting any blame to my upbringing or my parents or whatever my mother was going through, or the lack of supervision, none of that. I think more importantly, as she was going through that time in her life, and my younger sister got to go with her dad to safety, kind of like a safety ground, being that I really didn't know my dad. My safety ground were the relationships that I started to form in the neighborhood, the family unit that I conceived that I had, I guess. And so when I was out late at night doing the things that people do late at night in the International District, I think I just built my own sense of belonging and importance. I kind of had some street fame, if you will. And with that street fame came power. I was empowered in it. And I got really good at being bad. So, yeah, so it was like a sense of belonging.
So, in that, you explain yourself very well of building who you are based off of what you had to experience from such a young age. What about inside the prison walls? How did that atmosphere and that structure contribute to Renee today?
So it actually mirrored what I just said about in my young, wanting that belonging. So when I first got sentenced as an adult, I was 18. I got 5 years off the bat, no probation. I am a New Mexico Women's Correctional Center off the bat at 18 years old. And that's without juvenile history coming into play whatsoever. It was just my sentence. And so I remember walking in for the very first time, and I remember how I had a silent fear inside, butterflies, nervousness, never knew, I had no idea what I was walking into. But like the concrete slab of the juvenile shower, when I hit the hallway of CCA, I remember, I don't know, it was just like this hollow feeling. I really didn't know where I was or how I got there. I just knew that this was it for the next 5 years at 18 years old, And so I think that what happened is that I stepped into a role, because I truly believe now that the ability to conform, positive or negative, it's a trait that we all possess. But it's also a defense mechanism. And so I took it to heart, and when I conformed for the stay. Like I was going to be whatever I had to be to get through that. And so I had no idea at the time, but wow, I was just setting myself up for, I walked into a role that became a part of the very fiber of my being. Later on in life, it was so hard to shed. It was so hard to unlearn. Had I had known any better then, I would have never rooted myself in that system the way I did.
Wow, well spoken. So you speak of, not, had you have known better, maybe had different options, you wouldn't have allowed yourself to conform to that certain mentality. But is that to say that there was nothing positive or beneficial from your prison experiences or your sentences?
Looking back now, I love the woman I am today. And I know that being incarcerated has sharpened me and shaped me into that woman. It was like a tool that was used, but it took longer than would be expected, right? And there were other factors involved that helped shape, maturity and education and, just different dynamics. I think that some of the best experiences I've ever had were incarcerated with that particular people group, because some of the best, strongest, most powerful women I know are or have been incarcerated. So with that dynamic, when you get powerful women like that together in a positive, wow, there's nothing like it. I still haven't been to a meeting out here that can top some of the focus groups, that we had while there, and the ability to focus, right? We have all that time. But it took longer for me because I just didn't get it right away. And I didn't have any mentors in the beginning. The ones that I did, they were running tobacco and drugs, and there was just a lot of, they were my mentors, but they were mentors in a not so positive way. And so they were showing me the way and the ropes and everything else my first 5 years, where I conformed to corrections. And had I known better then, it would have been a whole different ballgame, probably a lot shorter stay, and I wouldn't have spent so many years behind bars. But because I didn't, I had to go the long way around and figure it out on my own. Mm-hmm. But when that time came and mentoring was brought to me through peer education and through education and through the recollection that I could be better and stronger in a positive way, it was the transforming point in my entire life. But prior to that, it was almost like growing up a teenager on the streets in a sense, because I was young. I was willing to do what I was more of the fame and the belonging. And so I was involved in a lot of the stuff in prison that's not even legal, right? So I went the long way around. But I think even that played a big role towards the end of my stay, or my last incarceration, because I already had such a name and influence. Even if the influence had been negative, that influence was so powerful that when I was able to transform it into a teaching, mentoring, trying to lead people in the right direction, it had a dynamic that was out of this world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can imagine, because you have a lot of lived experiences. I got to personally witness your influence, and it was very strong, and you're a captivating person. So what was, if you could list it, what was that one thing or a couple things that contributed to you going from walking the conformed way of corrections to now I want to mentor and be a positive influence? What made that transition actually possible?
So 11 years ago, my last felony was committed 11 years ago. 11 years ago, I returned to prison on a probation violation with new charges. I had conceived a child. So family, right? The sense of belonging, the sense of ownership, the reason of being, having something to focus on or even to provide for. The whole time, family for me had been inside the entire time. See, the defining factor in the beginning, I believe, one of them was that I didn't get visits from mom and dad. That was not a thing. Sisters, brothers, I didn't get letters. I never even bought phone time because there was nobody to call. And that was, from age 18 to age 32, 34, something like that. You never saw me on the phone. But that last time, 11 years ago, so when my child started to grow in my womb in that cell, and I started to read to her, and that was the defining moment where it was like, I could be a mother. I could really do this. I'd be a good mom. Like I know I can do this, and that was the defining factor. So with that came, okay, so where do I begin, right? Well, you stop dealing tobacco, and you got to stop working the officers, and you got to stop fighting, and you got to stop, there came with a list of things I had to do. And then I started adding college. So here came the education, and I found, I've always been really smart, always. I mean, I always scored really high and been a really great writer, really great speaker. And so I started to work at those things. And then, of course, came the spiritual aspect. And once I started to worship dance, once I started to read the word and those components put together, it just started to transform me from the inside out.
Your story is extremely relatable. Have you found that sharing your stories with those who are incarcerated, those who you work with, have you found that you've been able to connect on a deeper level with some of these individuals because of it?
I teach reentry education, and I work with youth who are in reentry. And the dynamic's amazing because I don't have to hide anything about where I've been, because actually where I've been in corrections and coming out of that, it's almost like a resume, especially with the youth. For some reason, when I speak, I capture them. And it's not because I'm captivating speaker, none of that comes into play. It's because it's relatable to their situation, to their pain, to their loss, to their struggle. And we all know that no situation and none of us are identical. I mean, there's similarities, but it's those similarities when it comes to the incarceration, the addiction, the loss, maybe a parent, the dysfunction of family. And they come to a place and they see someone who has been through the things that they're going through in the present, and at a place where they can talk about it and shout it on the rooftops, because I have no shame of my past. My past is shaped me into the woman I am today. And so I use it as a catalyst. And I think that empowers a lot of the women that I work with, the youth. And also women who are still involved, not just youth, but the women who are still involved in that type of living. There's hope when they see people who are actually climbing out of those circumstances.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. So tell me a little bit about what you do now.
So, I now I'm a navigator. So what does that mean? So I help people get up and navigate community resources. I like to say I'm a middleman. I know research. I go to trainings and I learn about who's doing what, where funding is, how much it costs, and the populations they serve. And throughout the week, every day is different, but I get so many men, women, youth, old, seniors. They walk through these doors, and I'm like a hub, and I'm able to get them to the places that they need so that they can be empowered, so that they can get out of their situations, so that they see someone cares. And sometimes it can be overloading, but I'm like a hub, a community hub. And my job is to stay informed, to stay connected, and to build connections. And when people who don't know how to do those things come seeking, I just have to make a phone call. And that's exactly how it's been for me since I began this position as a Pathways Navigator. I also, I do a Tuesday night group with the youth where I try to create vision. We do vision boards. We do, we build life recovery trees, things that I learned incarcerated. Oh, I bring it to them big time. The things that were most impactful with the women that were trying to reconstruct their lives in there, the things that I took note of, because, believe it or not, I kept a few boxes of those things. And so, yeah, I'm old school. I'll break out the paperwork if I have to and draw a poster if necessary. But, I'm into helping people rebuild their lives in whatever role or capacity I can do that in.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. And you work with the youth. So do you ever have opportunities where you get to potentially mentor a young Renee? And in that role, are you able to give her advice that you wish you would have had?
Oh yeah, I gotta be careful not to be an old lady, right? I find myself because the youth nowadays are so tech savvy. They're smart Alex, yeah. So I think that right now, I have a couple of youth that, they come and they hang on my arm, or they just want my attention, and I see myself sometimes when I'm sitting in SMAC, Sisters Making a Change. So ages 12 to 24. We sit in a circle, and we have a couple that are 12 years old now in our group. And when I see their young little faces staring back at me, I do see me that got arrested and strip searched and put in that cell. I see that in them, and I think that fuels my fire. And they're looking to be motivated. And then I remember I was looking for motivation. The thing is that what motivated me is I walked through a door of, illegal activity, and, stolen vehicles, older women, older men. Those things were exciting, right? In my young life. And so when they walk through my doors, I try to excite them with new life. I try to show them how exciting living life can be. Even in a mundane 9 to 5, you can make it exciting. And so, yeah, I get opportunities to mentor young women every week. And I take advantage of it. I pour my whole day into preparing for these girls to come into an atmosphere where they feel welcomed, where they feel empowered, where they feel like they can be themselves and tell their truth, safety, and also acceptance. I try to make sure that even people who come facilitate, because I get co-facilitators often, they go through a screening per se, because it's fine if you want to come and you want to experience the youth with me, but not if you want to come and just pick and choose, because it's an entire entity where we have to forget everything else, turn your phones off, and focus on these girls who have been left behind. And that's the hard part, to try to keep. At the end of every meeting, I usually weep because there's so much brokenness. There's so much. A lot of them are, hey, my mom? And it's like, yeah, I know your mom. Because I don't hide it, right? That's part of my background. So they know I've been incarcerated. And that's a lot of the connection, too, because these young girls miss their mamas. And a few of them are incarcerated as we speak. And I think that they come in expecting to see a little bit of their mom and me every week. And if I have to step into that role, I step into that role. Whatever empowers them in the moment. And so mentoring is definitely a factor. And it's a very powerful tool if utilized correctly. Very powerful.
In closing, Renee, what would you have wished you had known when you were younger that could have prevented or deterred you from the path that you actually went down?
That it's okay to ask for help. That it's okay to not know the answer. And that there's people out there who are passionate about walking young people through this thing called life. If your parents have left you, your family, if you don't have what the traditional family, there's other people who are willing to step in and make you a part of their family in a positive nature. It's just not all about having to link up with gangs or sex or, drugs and rock and roll. There's actually people who I've met and seen for myself who have already written the book. They've already, written the program. They are passionate about what they do. It's not just a credential. It's it's out of their heart. And had I had known, I would have reached out. I would have said, send me to a school, send me to something where I could learn to sharpen the powerful tools that I found later within myself. But intervention, and on a personal level, not in bulk, but tailored to the individual. Definitely.
Thank you, Renee.
You're welcome.